So you said you lived in Riverside. Describe your home and your grandfather's home. I'd like to hear about both.
Well,
where they were.
My grandmother had died sometime before, and so he came to live with his daughter, who was my mother, and he lived with us in the house home in Riverside, and we lived on the corner of St. John's and Cherry, and you know, it was just one of those big wooden Victorian homes that were prevalent in Riverside in those days, and some of them are still there today.
Would St. John's and Cherry, and I should know this, but I'm doubting myself, would that have still been considered the road? A little too far down?
No, that
too
was,
far down.
No, yeah. No. That was actually past. You see, the row you're talking about is actually Riverside Avenue.
Right.
St. John's
St. John's, that's right.
Till King Street.
That's right.
And so we were, you know, 2 blocks down from where St. Vincent's Hospital is.
Oh, okay, that is quite a bit further out.
But this house that we lived in, my grandfather bought it when my mother and father were married in 1916, and he bought it and gave it to them as a wedding present. I think it was $4,000 or $5,000 in those days. And the house was originally built by a man named Smith in 1902. The house was one of those houses that were built shortly after the fire, that when Riverside began to develop. And this Mr. Smith built the house, and you mentioned the prairie-style architecture. After he sold the house, he moved over on the corner of Cherry and Riverside Avenue and built the Prairie House that's there on that corner. That's probably the most, if you'll use that term, prairie-style home in Jacksonville, I would think, was also built and owned by Mr. Francis Smith, who built my mother and father's house.
I'm kind of wondering if that's where Dr. Wayne Wood lives today. I'm mixing since I've already mixed my streets up once, but I think that could be his home.
Well, it's a typical
when you say the most prairie
style, big brick.
How interesting.
You know, low and flat and all.
Well, and so your home life was with your grandfather, which is...
Well, yeah, when we were young, yes, you know. But you got to remember, in that era, grandparents weren't interested in grandchildren very much. My grandfather was a merchant. He was interested in the store, and he put up with kids, but he wasn't one of the kind that you would be bouncing on his knee every night, I'll tell you. He wasn't rude, he just wasn't interested in children.
I'm going to make the assumption you went to Duval High.
No.
No, you did. Were you already in let's say, 27?
I went to West Riverside, John Gorey, and Lee.
Okay, so you were not in high school until 27 then?
Right.
Okay, I mixed my, you're in your 87.
I didn't get into high school until the 1930s.
Because, okay, I do not add and subtract that well.
Lee, Jackson, and Landon were both built in 1927.
27, right. And I knew that, I just did not add appropriately. When you told me 87...
I hate to correct the historian.
No, it's more about my addition and subtraction than my history ability, I hope, at least.
But I went to local, you know, local schools, and, you know, and then, like all the kids in my neighborhood, we all went off together. And oddly enough, or not oddly enough, tomorrow I'll have a luncheon at my house, which we have once a month, and at that luncheon there'll be some kids who were with me in West Riverside in the first grade and all.
So you still get together with first grade buddies from West Riverside Elementary?
There's about, well, we were about 30 or 40 some years ago. We're shrunk down to about 15 or 18, but most of them, not all of them, but some of them are lifelong friends.
And you're all right about 87 years old then?
Yeah, all in now 85, 86, 87, like that.
Well, I'd say there's something pretty good in the water over in Riverside. That's some good genetic material.
A lot of them have gone and not available to go, and some of them are still alive but not physically able to go. But, you know, they pass on sooner or later. But we still have a few left.
And in the meantime, after you attended West Riverside, John Gorey, and then Lee High School, all these, Lee, Landon, Jackson, as you said, all came on board in 27, and you were in school in the 30s. You then would leave and go to the University of Florida and study, am I correct on that?
Well, first I went to the University of Alabama, and when I graduated from high school, and then I was there for a year, and then I went to the University of Miami for a year, and then I went to LSU for a semester. So I was, you might say, educated beyond my intelligence, I guess. And then the war came on, and I was 5 years in the service, 3 years in England during the war. And so there was a long period of time before I actually got back to Jacksonville.
Okay.
And then when I came back after the war in 1945, I went back to Gainesville and had 2 years for landscape architecture and horticulture.
I really did mess up in my addition and subtraction, because I guess it's because I knew you saw the dome in the building. I just was just marveling at that. But so therefore you finished up at University of Florida after the war, and now we're going to get to the part, because you really, not only have you lived Jacksonville history and this wonderful legacy of Cohen brothers and your grandfather Morris Cohen, but you've also been part of another kind of history, the citrus history of North Florida. And you first were a landscape architect for many, many years, decided retirement was just too lame for you, and in the last decade or so, you have honed in on just providing citrus primarily, not commercially, but to homeowners who really want a hardy stock. And talk a little bit about your citrus business and about the history of citrus in North Florida, because it's so fascinating.
Well, of course, many people don't realize, but the history of citrus has to start in Jacksonville, because basically Jacksonville was where the whole industry began in this country, almost, you might say. And it started right after the war in the 1870s, and the plantings were all along, mostly on the east side of the river where the grand land was higher, from Arlington all the way down to Palatka and beyond. And there were a few places on the west side where there were higher land approaching the river, Orange Park, Green Cove Springs, Fleming Island, some of those. But many places on the west side of the river, the land was lower, swampy, close to the river, so that it wasn't as prevalent on the west side as it was the east side. And it was for its time, a huge business. It was a very, very large business for that era. People don't realize it, but it was probably one of the big businesses in the South from about 1880 to, say, 1920s, in that period, because they used to ship from Jacksonville 8 and 10 million boxes of fruit a year. Well, now 8 and 10 million boxes a year today is practically nothing, but during that era it was a huge amount, because this is before, of course, the automobile and before roads and before mechanical installation. Everything was horse and wagon and hand done, and so it was a huge thing. And most people believe and understand that the industry was here till we had a series of freezes, and then the whole business moved away. Well, that's perfectly true. They did have a series of freezes, and the industry did move away. There's no question about that. But that wasn't the primary reason they moved. The primary reason they moved was a business that every business moves. Land values got too expensive to support the business. And transportation was a terrible factor. The transportation for the citrus industry in Jacksonville was by boat on the river, because there were no roads and things. So in the 1920s, the railroad went straight through the central part of the state, and in that part of the state, land was very cheap, 50 cents, $1 an acre, ideal citrus land, high sand hills with freshwater lakes in the bottoms. And so they built the packing houses alongside the railroad tracks, and they built the groves alongside the packing houses, and all down along the railroad tracks going through the central part of the state, the citrus industry flourished until the 1980s. And in the 1980s, the same thing happened again. had a series of very bad freezes. Land values had skyrocketed because of the mouse that was eating at the roots of the tree. The mouse was called Mickey Mouse, in case you don't understand.
I was getting ready to ask. Go ahead. No, I
and
didn't.
land values, because of Mickey Mouse, had increased dramatically, and it became not the economic thing to do to build a new grove if you could sell for mobile home parks and strip malls. And if you go through the citrus area now, that's what you will see is mobile home parks and strip malls. And the industry has moved 150 miles south. Land values are cheaper. They got down there again. And the only real difference is when they were in the central part of the state, they were almost all individually owned, but now it's almost all corporate owned. Coca-Cola, Minute Maid, Pepsi-Cola, they're the big players in the citrus industry today in Florida. And there's practically no individuals could afford to do the gigantic investment that it takes to build a modern citrus grove.
And your citrus grove that you offer, your citrus that you offer at the Flying Dragon Citrus Nursery, did I get that right?
Right.
You are really offering this to the homeowner who just maybe wants a couple of citrus trees in their yard, and I know you grow something that's at least in one variety, a cold hardy stock. Tell me a little about that. We have a minute or so left.
Well, Flying Dragon is the rootstock these trees are grown on.
Oh.
And it comes from Japan, where they have it much colder than we do, and they want a dwarf cold hardy tree. And so we started this, which is my son and I, which is designed primarily just for homeowners, because it's not a commercial tree. It only grows 7, 8, 9 feet tall. And while it has wonderful fruit in large quantities for its size, it's not a 20, 30 foot commercial sized tree. And we sell them from Jacksonville north, all the way to Charleston, Columbia, South Carolina. We have plenty of trees all up there that do quite well under those circumstances. And but it's a homeowner tree that is kind of a niche business. It's not a big business, it's a small business.
Well, it's nice to have a niche business as you move into your 9th or 10th decade. It really is. It is.
Well, it's just the two of us, so it takes all we can do just to keep up with the small business we have.
Well, one thing I want to recognize, you've been a great steward of your community, because I know what you've done to help history organizations. You just finished planting a grove of citrus at the Mander Museum and Historical Society's property down on County Dock Road at their museum facility there, the Webb Farm, or thank you very much, at the Webb Farmhouse, and you've planted this wonderful grove. You want to tell me a little bit about that? You did that about a month or two ago.
Well, it's an ongoing project, and we deliberately planted small trees so that with the idea that only 10 or 12, and at this time, and with the idea that in the future people will be able to bring their families there and say, I remember when these trees were tiny little trees. And it's one of those things we feel like will, in the years to come, the people will be encouraged to go, and we're going to plant more. Every time they have a program, we'll plant another 10 or 12, and eventually we'll have a whole grove of orange trees.
Well, Billy Barwald, Mr. Barwald, I'm getting the wrap-up signal. I want to thank you for all you've done to promote Jacksonville's history, all you've done at the Walter Jones Historical Park. People can go down there and see these wonderful orange trees. They can see the farmhouse. It's just been wonderful having you here as a guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.